My child needs a father, the Apache widow whispered to the virgin rancher. The sun was high in the sky, casting a harsh golden light over the wide, empty stretches of Arizona. The virgin rancher, a man known for his quiet nature and solitary life, rode slowly along the uneven trail that marked the edge of his property. His horse, a sturdy bay named Dusty, picked its way carefully over the dry, rocky soil. The rancher was used to this routine. The sound of the wind through the sparse trees, the occasional call of a hawk overhead, and the endless stretch of land that seemed to go on forever. He had lived here for years, relying only on his own skills, his cattle, and the land itself. To outsiders, his life might have seemed lonely, but he found a strange peace in the solitude, a rhythm in the work that gave him purpose and quiet strength. As he crested a small hill, Dusty slowed, ears pricked. The rancher followed his horse's gaze toward a bend in the dry riverbed below. At first he saw only a small cloud of dust stirred by movement. Then he noticed a woman crouched on the ground, trying to calm a young boy who seemed frightened and restless. The woman's clothing was simple but worn, and her long, dark hair fell loosely around her shoulders, framing a face lined with fatigue and quiet sorrow. Her eyes, deep and serious, flicked up at him for only a moment before returning to the child. The rancher felt a strange pull in his chest, a feeling he had not experienced in years. For a moment he hesitated. Strangers rarely came to this part of the desert. His life was one of careful order and solitude, and the appearance of someone here, especially a woman and child alone, was unusual, perhaps even dangerous. But he could see that the woman meant no harm. The boy, no more than 7 or 8, clung to her side, his small hands gripping hers tightly. His dark eyes, wide with curiosity and fear, looked up at the rancher with something that seemed to ask for help without words. The woman's voice was soft, almost a whisper, as she spoke to the child. "It's okay, little one. He won't hurt us. Just stay calm." She glanced toward the rancher again, her expression a mixture of hope and caution. Then, as if feeling the weight of unspoken words, she added something that stopped the rancher in his tracks. "My child needs a father." The words were simple, but their meaning cut deep. The rancher's chest tightened. He had spent many years alone, and he had long grown accustomed to silence and self-reliance, yet in that single sentence he felt a connection he could not explain. There was no demand, no expectation beyond honesty, but the quiet plea was enough to stir something buried deep inside him, something he had almost forgotten, the desire to protect, to care, and to belong. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the hard, sun-baked earth. Dusty snorted and stamped, uneasy with the sudden movement. The boy flinched slightly at the sound, hiding his face against the woman's side. The rancher held up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said in a calm voice, careful not to startle them further. "I'm just passing by. Are you all right?" The woman straightened, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. "We're managing," she said carefully. "It's been difficult. We've been on our own for some time now." Her words were measured, but the rancher could hear the weight of exhaustion in them. He noticed that the boy's clothes were worn and dusty, his small feet bare, showing signs of long travel or hardship. The sight tugged at his heart, but he forced himself to stay composed. He had to understand the situation fully before acting. "Where is your home?" he asked, keeping his tone gentle. "Do you need water or food?" The woman hesitated, her gaze flicking toward the distant hills. "Our home, it's not far," she said slowly. "But it isn't safe anymore. I have been trying to keep my son hidden, protected. We've had some trouble." She paused, as if unsure how much to reveal. Finally she added, "I lost my husband recently." He is gone, and now it is only me and the boy." The rancher felt a pang of sympathy. Loss was something he understood in his own way. Though he had never married and had no children, he had experienced the death of people he cared about, the sudden absence that left a space so large it seemed impossible to fill. He knew the kind of fear and uncertainty the woman and her son must feel, and the thought of leaving them alone in the harsh desert unsettled him. "Come with me," he said after a moment, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "I have water at the ranch. Food, too." "You can rest there, just until we figure things out." The woman's eyes widened slightly, and she glanced down at her son. He looked at her, searching her face for guidance, and she nodded ever so slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. There was relief in her voice, though it was tempered by caution. She stood, dusting off her simple dress, and helped the boy to his feet. He clung to her hand tightly as they moved toward the rancher, unsure but trusting the stranger's calm presence. The journey back to the ranch was slow, the sun pressing down on them, making the boy tired and irritable at times. But the rancher moved steadily, offering quiet words of encouragement and letting the horse lead them at a comfortable pace. He noticed how carefully the woman observed every detail of his land, how her eyes flicked to the fences, the barns, and the distant mountains, as if assessing whether this place could be trusted. The rancher understood. Trust was not given lightly, especially to someone who had faced loss and danger. When they finally arrived at the ranch, the boy's eyes widened at the sight of the wide-open space, the grazing cattle, and the sturdy buildings that promised safety and shelter. The rancher led them to the small cabin near the main barn. Inside, he offered water and simple food, bread, cheese, and fresh milk. The boy drank greedily, and the woman accepted the food with quiet gratitude, her hands shaking slightly as she set it on the table. They ate in silence at first, the quiet broken only by the occasional clink of utensils and the soft breathing of the boy. The rancher watched them carefully, noting how the woman glanced around, still assessing, still unsure. He understood that this was not just hunger or thirst she had brought here. It was fear, uncertainty, and the weight of responsibility for a child who depended on her entirely. After a few moments, he spoke again. "You don't have to tell me everything right away," he said. "I just want to help. If you need safety, shelter, or someone to watch over your boy for a little while, you have it here. That's all I ask." The woman looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and hesitation. She nodded slowly, and for the first time a faint smile touched her lips. "Thank you," she said again. I don't know how to repay you. We have had so little kindness lately." The rancher shrugged, brushing off her gratitude with a quiet humility. "No need," he said simply. "Sometimes helping someone is enough." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the rancher sat on the porch and watched the woman and boy settle into the cabin. He could hear the soft murmur of their conversation, the occasional laugh from the boy, and the quiet steps of a woman trying to create comfort out of uncertainty. For the first time in years, he felt a shift within himself, a warmth that came not from the sun but from the knowledge that someone had reached out and he had answered. He did not yet know what the future would hold, whether this encounter would lead to a lasting bond or simply be a brief act of kindness, but he knew one thing: he could not turn them away. The plea, whispered in desperation, "My child needs a father," had found a place in his heart he thought was long closed. And in that moment, standing alone on his porch as the desert darkened around him, he realized that life had a way of bringing people together when they needed it most, in ways they could never have predicted. And so, the virgin rancher, a man who had lived his life in solitude, opened his home, his land, and perhaps unknowingly, his heart, to a woman and child who needed him more than they could yet say. That simple act, born of empathy and quiet courage, would mark the beginning of a story none of them could have imagined. A story of trust, resilience, and the unexpected ways that family can form in the most unlikely places. The next morning, the virgin rancher woke early, as was his habit. The sun was just beginning to spill its golden light across the hills, and the air carried the faint scent of dry earth and grass. He moved quietly around the ranch, checking the fences and the cattle, making sure everything was in order. Dusty, his loyal horse, grazed nearby, its ears twitching at the distant sounds of birds. Life on the ranch demanded routine, and he had built his days around the steady rhythm of work. But now, that rhythm had been interrupted in a way he had not expected. Inside the cabin, the Apache widow was awake as well. She had barely slept the night before, her mind filled with questions and worry. Could this man be trusted? Would he turn them away once he fully understood their situation? She watched her son sleep, his small chest rising and falling gently, and her heart ached with both love and fear. He needed a father, someone strong and steady to guide him through life, someone who could protect him when she could not. And somehow she sensed that the virgin rancher might be that person. But it was not a simple decision. Trust was not given lightly, and she had learned through hardship and loss that appearances could be deceiving. The boy woke soon after, rubbing his eyes and stretching. "Mama, is he going to stay?" he asked in a small, uncertain voice. The widow knelt beside him, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "I don't know, little one," she said softly. "But he seems kind. He helped us yesterday. We'll see." Her voice was gentle, meant to soothe, but even as she spoke, she felt a flicker of hope. The boy's eyes, wide and trusting, looked at her, as if silently urging her to believe. By mid-morning, the widow and her son had joined the rancher outside. She worked alongside him, helping feed the smaller animals and mend a broken fence. The rancher observed her carefully. She moved with quiet determination, her hands skilled and sure, though there was a softness in her approach that spoke of patience and care. The boy watched from nearby, fascinated by the cattle and the routines of ranch life. The rancher knelt beside him, showing him how to lead a calf without startling it, how to hold the rope, and when to be gentle. The boy's face lit up with a mixture of concentration and excitement, and the rancher felt an unfamiliar warmth. Teaching this boy, guiding him, watching him learn. It was a new experience, one that left him quietly satisfied in a way he had never known before. As the day progressed, the rancher and the widow talked, though carefully at first. He wanted to understand their situation, and she wanted to be honest without revealing too much too soon. She explained that her husband had died in a sudden accident at a mine, leaving her alone to care for her son. The boy had been her entire world, and the loss of his father had left them vulnerable in more ways than one. They had wandered from place to place, seeking safety, food, and stability, until they found themselves at the edge of the ranch. The rancher listened in silence, absorbing each word. He understood hardship and solitude, though his own experiences were different. He had lived alone by choice, not circumstance, and the presence of this woman and her son forced him to reconsider what solitude meant. Could a person truly be alone if someone depended on them? He felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a challenge he was willing to accept. Yet, despite his growing empathy, hesitation lingered. Helping them was one thing, but bringing strangers into his life could have consequences. There were dangers in the region, people who might not welcome outsiders, and social complications that could arise if townsfolk learned he was sheltering them. The widow sensed his caution, but she did not push. She simply worked, smiled when appropriate, and allowed the rancher to guide the pace of trust. There was dignity in her restraint, and the rancher respected it. By afternoon, a rhythm had formed. The boy followed the rancher as he checked fences, mimicking his movements with careful attention. The woman assisted with chores, her hands moving with skill and confidence. Though the work was hard and the sun relentless, there was a sense of unity forming, small but noticeable. The rancher began to see them not as strangers but as part of the life he had built, fragile yet full of potential. Over a shared meal that evening, the rancher spoke about the land, the cattle, and the responsibilities of ranch life. "It's not easy," he said, his voice low and even. "You have to respect the land, the animals, and the work. If you don't, you'll struggle. But if you care, it gives back more than you expect." The widow nodded, listening carefully. She had survived by relying on intuition and perseverance, but she recognized the value of knowledge and experience. The rancher's words were simple, but they carried authority, and she felt a growing respect for him. Her son listened as well, absorbing every word, his young mind wide open to learning new ways, new routines, and perhaps a new way of life. That night the rancher walked to the edge of the property, watching the stars appear one by one in the clear desert sky. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant call of a coyote or the rustle of a breeze through the dry grass. He thought about the woman and her son, about the plea that had reached him yesterday. "My child needs a father," and he realized that helping them might not only save them but also bring something to his own life that had been missing. Perhaps it was companionship, perhaps it was purpose, or perhaps it was simply the chance to make a difference in someone else's life. Whatever it was, he felt a quiet certainty that he could not ignore the opportunity. The days that followed were a delicate balance. The rancher maintained his routines while gradually allowing the widow and her son to participate more fully. He showed her how to care for the cattle, repair fences, and manage the tools. He taught the boy simple lessons about responsibility, patience, and courage. Slowly, the fear and hesitation that had marked their arrival began to ease. The boy smiled more readily, laughed when he learned something new, and even began to help with chores without constant supervision. The widow, too, began to relax, her steps more confident, her voice more assured. Trust, however, was not given lightly. The widow observed the rancher carefully, noting his patience, his fairness, and the subtle ways he showed care without words. She began to sense that he was not just offering temporary shelter, but that he might genuinely accept them into his life. And yet, she remained cautious. Loss had taught her the fragility of hope, and she was determined to protect her son until she was certain of safety. The rancher noticed her caution and respected it. He did not push, did not demand explanations, and allowed them to adjust to life on the ranch at their own pace. In turn, he began to feel a growing connection to both of them, a bond that was built not on necessity, but on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the quiet understanding that each of them needed something the others could provide. By the end of the week, the ranch had begun to feel different to him. Where once it had been a place of solitude and routine, it now carried laughter, chatter, and movement that was unfamiliar yet welcome. The boy ran freely across the fields, learning the names of the animals and discovering the joy of open space. The widow worked alongside him, offering guidance to the boy and learning new skills herself. And the rancher, watching them, felt a sense of fulfillment he had not known he was missing. Late one evening, as they sat around a small fire near the cabin, the boy asked a question that made both adults pause. "Will you be my father?" His voice was hesitant, unsure, but filled with hope. The rancher looked at him, seeing the innocence, the longing, and the trust in those young eyes. The widow's hand rested on his shoulder, a silent encouragement. The rancher smiled softly, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I will try," he said. "I will do my best. That's all anyone can promise." And with that, a quiet understanding passed between them. They were not yet a family, not yet fully united by love or history. But the first steps had been taken. Trust had begun to grow, bonds had begun to form, and a new chapter in all their lives had begun. The desert night stretched endlessly around them. But for the first time, the virgin rancher did not feel alone. In the following days, their routine deepened. The rancher taught the boy how to ride properly, how to mend broken fences, and even how to identify edible plants and water sources in the dry land. The boy struggled at first, but with patience he learned quickly. The widow grew more confident in her abilities as well, and her bond with the rancher strengthened quietly through shared work and mutual respect. Each evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, they would gather at the cabin, sharing meals and stories. The boy told tales of his father, of their time before the accident, and the rancher listened, offering quiet words of encouragement and wisdom. He shared stories of the land, of the challenges and joys of ranch life, and of lessons learned through solitude and experience. Through these small moments, the foundation of a family was being built, not through force or obligation, but through patience, care, and the quiet realization that they had all found something in each other that they had been missing. And though challenges surely lay ahead for the first time in their lives, each of them felt a flicker of hope that they would not have to face the future alone. Life on the ranch settled into a quiet rhythm, but it was far from easy. The virgin rancher had always lived alone, relying solely on his experience, strength, and careful planning. Now, with the Apache widow and her young son living on the ranch, every day brought new challenges, both practical and emotional. The boy had grown more confident, but he still hesitated when faced with unfamiliar tasks. The widow had adapted well to the physical work, but there were moments when her worry for her son showed in her furrowed brow and tight grip on his hand. The rancher watched them closely, realizing that patience would be key. Teaching, guiding, and protecting were all things he understood in theory, but he had never been responsible for another person's life in this way. He began with the boy, taking him along for the early morning rounds before the sun became unbearable. Together, they checked the fences, herded the cattle, and tended to the smaller animals. At first, the boy struggled with even simple tasks, holding a rope correctly, leading a calf, or balancing on horseback, but the rancher never lost his temper. Instead, he offered gentle corrections, quiet encouragement, and careful demonstrations. "Keep your hands steady," the rancher instructed one morning, showing the boy how to hold the rope properly while guiding a stubborn calf back into the pen. "You can't rush. The animal will sense your fear or frustration. Patience works better than force." The boy nodded. Concentration etched across his young face. Slowly he improved. Each small success was celebrated not with grand words, but with a nod, a smile, or a quiet, "good job" that carried more weight than any praise. These moments, though simple, built a foundation of trust. The boy began to see the rancher not as a stranger or a temporary helper, but as someone steady and dependable, a figure he could look to for guidance and protection. Meanwhile, the widow took on chores alongside the rancher, learning to mend fences, feed the animals, and manage the tools and equipment. She had practical skills from her life with her late husband, but there were aspects of ranch work she had never faced before. The rancher showed her how to identify weak spots in the fences, how to maintain the water troughs, and how to organize the barn for efficiency. At first, she was hesitant, cautious about making mistakes that could cost them time or safety. But he encouraged her, patiently explaining each step until she gained confidence. Their relationship, though still measured and cautious, began to deepen. The rancher noticed small gestures that revealed her character, her careful attention to the boy, the way she cleaned the stalls meticulously, her quiet determination to make the ranch feel like a home. She, in turn, noticed his reliability, his fairness, and the way he taught rather than commanded. Trust, though unspoken, was growing steadily between them. Yet life was not without its challenges. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept across the desert, with wind and rain lashing at the land. The cattle grew restless, and the boy, unused to such weather, clung to his mother in fear. The rancher sprang into action, guiding the animals to shelter and securing the loose gates and tools. The widow helped as best she could, her hands trembling from both effort and anxiety. Together, they managed to protect the cattle and themselves, but it was exhausting work. Later, as the storm subsided, the rancher sat with the boy and wiped the mud from his small boots. "You did well today," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It wasn't easy, but you stayed brave." "I was scared," he admitted quietly. "That's okay," the rancher said gently. "Being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you care. Courage is moving forward even when you're afraid." The boy smiled, a small but genuine expression, and the rancher felt an unfamiliar sense of pride. It was moments like these that made him realize that his role in their lives was becoming more than just a helper or neighbor. He was becoming a guide, a protector, and slowly, a father figure. The widow watched these interactions from a distance, a quiet smile on her face. She had feared for her son's future after losing his father, but seeing him gain confidence and learning from someone she could trust filled her with relief. At the same time, she felt a growing admiration for the rancher, not just for his skills, but for his character. He was patient without being weak, strong without being harsh, and caring without being intrusive. She began to see that perhaps there was more to life than mere survival. Perhaps it was possible to build a new beginning even after profound loss. Over the following weeks, the boy grew more skilled and self-assured. He learned to ride properly, to guide the cattle, and even to help with smaller chores like feeding the chickens and gathering eggs. Each success, however small, strengthened his confidence and deepened the bond between him and the rancher. They began to share quiet conversations, the rancher offering gentle advice, and the boy listening intently. Sometimes they would sit under the shade of a lone mesquite tree, the boy asking questions about the land, the animals, or life itself, and the rancher answering patiently, often with stories from his own past. The widow, too, became more involved. She began to cultivate a small garden near the cabin, planting vegetables and herbs that could provide nourishment and a sense of home. The rancher offered guidance, showing her which plants thrived in the arid soil and how to protect them from the harsh sun. Together, they worked, laughed, and sometimes shared quiet moments of reflection, though words of emotion were rare. Their connection was forming not in grand declarations, but in the everyday acts of cooperation, respect, and care. One day, while repairing a section of fence damaged by a recent storm, the rancher paused and looked at the widow. "You've learned quickly," he said. "You're careful, steady. And you care about this land and these animals? That matters." She glanced at him, a hint of color rising in her cheeks. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's new to me, but I want to do it right for him and for us." Her voice trailed, leaving the implication unspoken but understood. The rancher nodded, recognizing the meaning without requiring words. The boy, overhearing, ran to join them. "Look! I can do it too!" he exclaimed, showing off a small repair he had attempted on his own. The rancher chuckled, impressed by his effort, even if it was not perfect. "That's good," he said. "You're learning fast. Keep practicing, and you'll be as good as me one day." The boy beamed with pride, and the widow's smile mirrored his joy. Despite the progress, challenges continued to test them. The harsh environment of the desert, the physical demands of ranch work, and the lingering uncertainties of their past meant that every day required effort, patience, and resilience. The rancher found himself constantly balancing his time and attention between the boy, the widow, and the land. He learned to anticipate the boy's needs, to offer guidance without overstepping, and to provide reassurance when fear or doubt crept in. Similarly, he supported the widow, offering practical advice, helping with difficult tasks, and respecting her judgment and independence. Gradually, the lines between duty and affection began to blur. The rancher realized that his concern for the boy went beyond teaching skills or ensuring safety. It was personal. He wanted the boy to thrive, to grow confident, and to feel secure. Similarly, he found himself caring for the widow in ways he had never expected, appreciating her strength, kindness, and wisdom. Each shared task, each moment of laughter, each quiet evening by the fire strengthened the bond that was forming between them. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, the trio sat together on the porch of the cabin. The boy leaned against the rancher, tired but content after a day of learning and chores. The widow sat nearby, her hand resting lightly on her son's shoulder. Silence stretched comfortably between them, filled with the soft sounds of the desert, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a bird, and the gentle wind sweeping across the open land. The rancher broke the silence, speaking quietly. "You've both done well this week. The boy is learning, and you're finding your place here. That's important." The widow nodded, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "It's different," she said softly. "But it feels right. Somehow I can see that we can make it here. That this can be a new beginning." The rancher smiled faintly, his gaze shifting to the horizon. "Beginnings are never easy," he said. "But if you're willing to work, to trust, and to care, they can be worth it. That's something I've learned over the years." The boy yawned, his small face relaxed and peaceful. "I like it here," he murmured. "I feel safe." The rancher's heart tightened at the words. Safety, he realized, was more than just protection from the physical dangers of the land. It was also about trust, love, and belonging. And in that moment he understood that he was beginning to provide all of these things, even if he had not fully recognized it before. The widow watched him, sensing the quiet shift in his demeanor. There was a gentleness in his actions, a patience in his words, and a warmth in his gaze that was new. She felt a growing certainty that he could become the father her son needed, not through obligation, but through genuine care and commitment. As night fell and the stars appeared one by one in the clear desert sky, the three of them remained on the porch, the boy resting against the rancher, the widow close by. A sense of calm settled over them, the trials of the day fading into the quiet reassurance of shared presence. Trust had begun to take root, bonds were strengthening, and a sense of family, fragile but real, was beginning to form. In the weeks that followed, their routine continued to grow stronger, punctuated by small victories, shared challenges, and quiet moments of connection. The rancher taught not only skills but also values: patience, responsibility, courage, and respect. The widow contributed her wisdom, resilience, and care, guiding her son and learning from the rancher as well. And the boy, absorbing all that surrounded him, began to understand what it meant to belong, to trust, and to love. It was not yet a perfect family nor a life without difficulties, but it was a beginning shaped by patience, effort, and quiet courage, a beginning that promised that despite past hardships, there was hope for the future. And as the desert night stretched endlessly around them, the virgin rancher realized that the lives of the widow and her son had already changed his own, and that perhaps, just perhaps, he was ready for this new chapter too. The morning air was crisp as the virgin rancher stepped outside, Dusty's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust on the dry earth. The sun had not yet risen high, and the desert was painted with soft shades of orange and pink. Life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm, but the calm was fragile. The widow and her son had grown accustomed to the work and the routines, yet challenges and dangers were never far away. In the desert, life was harsh and the slightest mistake could lead to trouble. That day, as the rancher inspected the northern fence line, he noticed something that made his heart tighten. A section of fence had been damaged, likely by a stray herd that had wandered too close. He hurried to fix it, realizing immediately that the job would require more than just his own strength. He needed the boy's help, and possibly the widow's as well. The boy, eager to prove himself, ran to join him, carrying tools with more enthusiasm than skill. "I can help!" he called, eyes shining with determination. "Careful!" the rancher said, crouching to adjust the rope the boy was holding. "It's not just about strength. You have to think ahead. Safety first." The boy nodded, trying to focus, though his small hands trembled slightly. The widow arrived moments later, carrying supplies and water. "Be careful, both of you," she cautioned, a note of worry in her voice. Her eyes scanned the surrounding hills as though expecting trouble to appear at any moment. The rancher nodded but did not respond, focusing instead on organizing the repair. As they worked, the boy showed improvement. He learned to hold the hammer properly, to secure posts in place, and to follow the rancher's careful instructions. The widow, too, proved capable, steadying posts and holding ropes as needed. Their cooperation was not perfect, but it was enough to get the job done. Each small success, though physically exhausting, strengthened their bond. They were becoming a team, learning to trust each other and to rely on one another in ways neither had anticipated. However, the peace of the day was abruptly interrupted. A band of outlaws wandering through the area appeared on the far ridge, their horses kicking up dust as they approached. The rancher immediately recognized the danger. He knew these men were likely looking for trouble, maybe theft, maybe conflict. His heart quickened, but his voice remained calm as he whispered to the widow, "Stay behind me. Keep the boy close." Fear was visible in her eyes, but she did not resist. She trusted the rancher, understanding that he had the knowledge and strength to protect them. The boy, sensing the tension, pressed against her side, unsure but aware that something serious was unfolding. The outlaws approached, calling out threats and demands. The rancher stood firm, his posture calm but authoritative. "You don't belong here," he said steadily. "Turn back, or you'll regret it!" The leader of the group sneered, clearly underestimating the rancher. "This is open land. Anyone can ride through," he said, spurring his horse closer. He knew he had to act decisively to protect his makeshift family. With quick thinking, he guided the widow and boy behind a cluster of boulders while he positioned himself between them and the outlaws. Dusty, sensing the tension, stood alert, ready to respond at the rancher's command. The outlaws tried to intimidate him, but the rancher remained calm, projecting quiet strength. "Leave now," he warned again. "You're not welcome here." After tense moments that seemed to stretch into eternity, the outlaws, sensing the rancher's determination and unwillingness to back down, the rancher watched them disappear into the distance before releasing a slow breath. The widow and her son emerged from their hiding spot, trembling but unharmed. "Are you okay?" the widow asked, her voice shaky but relieved. "Yes," the rancher replied calmly. "It's over. They won't return for a while." The boy clung to him, feeling safe in the rancher's presence. The rancher placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You were brave," he said quietly. "But always remember, courage is not just standing firm. It's also knowing when to be careful." The incident left a lasting impression. It was the first real danger they had faced together, and it had tested the trust and courage of all three. The widow saw clearly that the rancher was capable of protecting them, not only through strength but through calm judgment. The boy, though still young, began to understand that true safety came from knowledge, patience, and reliance on someone steady. Life continued on the ranch, but the memory of the outlaws lingered, reminding them that their world was fragile and that vigilance was necessary. The rancher became more attentive, ensuring that the fences were strong, the gates secure, and the animals protected. He also spent more time teaching the boy practical skills for safety, such as recognizing tracks, observing the land, and understanding potential threats. Meanwhile, the widow faced a different kind of challenge: the judgment and prejudice of nearby townsfolk. Word had spread that she was living with the rancher, and whispers began circulating, questioning her character and intentions. She felt the sting of mistrust, though she tried not to let it show. The rancher, aware of the tension, defended her quietly but firmly, ensuring that his actions and words conveyed respect and protection rather than confrontation. Through these trials, the bonds between the three deepened. They learned to rely on each other not just for work, but for emotional support. The widow shared stories of her late husband with the boy, explaining his values and lessons, while the rancher reinforced these lessons with practical guidance. The boy began to see them as a united team, his mother and the man who had stepped into his life as a father figure. Small victories punctuated the challenges. One day, the boy successfully guided a small herd of cattle through a narrow canyon, a task he had once feared impossible. The rancher watched quietly, then nodded in approval. "Well done," he said simply. The boy's face lit up with pride, and the widow, observing from nearby, felt a surge of relief and joy. The widow also began to take more initiative around the ranch. She planted additional crops, repaired sections of the barn, and even helped train the boy in skills he was learning from the rancher. The trio was no longer simply surviving. They were building a life shaped by cooperation, trust, and growing love. Yet, life on the ranch was not only about survival. It was also about learning, patience, and quiet joy. The rancher taught the boy how to ride faster, how to read the weather, and even how to track wildlife. The boy responded with enthusiasm, eager to master each new skill. The widow shared her knowledge of plants and healing herbs, teaching both the boy and the rancher about remedies and care that had been passed down through her family. Through these lessons, laughter began to fill the ranch in a way it had never done before. The boy's giggles echoed across the fields as he attempted new tricks on horseback, and the widow's soft laughter blended with the sounds of the animals in the wind. The rancher, though initially reserved, found himself smiling more often, his heart quietly warming to the life that was unfolding around him. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat around a small fire outside the cabin. The boy leaned against the rancher, exhausted but happy, while the widow sat nearby, tending the fire and observing the stars as they began to twinkle in the clear night sky. "Do you think we'll always be safe here?" the boy asked softly, his eyes reflecting both curiosity and concern. The rancher looked at him, considering his words carefully. "We can never know for certain," he replied. "But we can make smart choices, stay prepared, and look out for each other. That's what matters." "Together, we're stronger than alone," the widow smiled faintly, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "He's right," she said. "We have each other. That is our strength." In the quiet that followed, the rancher realized something profound. Family was not always defined by blood. It was formed through shared experiences, trust, protection, and care. The trials they had faced, the threat of the outlaws, the scrutiny of the town, the demands of the land, had brought them closer together, proving that they could rely on each other in both fear and joy. As the fire crackled and the stars shone above, the three of them sat in a comfortable silence. They had faced danger and uncertainty, yet they had emerged stronger, more united, and more aware of the bonds forming between them. The rancher understood that his life had changed irrevocably. He was no longer just a solitary man of the land. He had become a protector, a guide, and perhaps even a father to the boy he had welcomed into his home. And the widow, watching the rancher and her son, felt hope stirring in her heart, a hope she had not felt in years. For the first time since her husband's death, she believed that they could build a future together, not defined by loss, but by courage, love, and shared purpose. The desert night stretched endlessly around them, quiet yet full of promise. The trials they had endured had tested their strength and resolve, but they had also shown them that trust, patience, and courage could create a family where none had existed before. The virgin rancher, the Apache widow, and her young son had survived the challenges of the land and the dangers that came with it. And in doing so, they had begun to form a bond that was as enduring as the desert itself, a bond that promised resilience, safety, and the quiet beginnings of a life built together. The morning sun rose slowly over the hills, painting the ranch in warm shades of gold. The virgin rancher stepped outside, stretching his arms as he breathed in the crisp desert air. For the first time in many years, the ranch felt alive, not just with animals and the wind, but with people who mattered. The Apache widow and her son had become part of his daily life, not as strangers, but as a family taking shape, slowly and naturally. The sense of quiet purpose that had always filled him now carried a new meaning. He was no longer merely caring for the land, he was caring for a home and for lives that depended on him. The boy ran to meet him, his small boots kicking up dust as he held a bundle of fresh herbs from the garden his mother had cultivated. "Look, Papa, I picked these!" he exclaimed, eyes bright with pride. The rancher smiled, kneeling to inspect the small harvest. "Good work," he said, brushing his hand over the boy's dusty hair. "You're learning quickly, and the land is responding to your care." The boy beamed, clearly delighted by the praise. He glanced toward his mother, who watched from the cabin porch, her eyes soft and filled with pride. She had grown stronger in these months, her confidence and independence evident in every movement. She had faced prejudice from townsfolk, dangers from wandering outlaws, and the everyday challenges of ranch life, yet she had endured with resilience and grace. Now, as she looked at the rancher and her son, she felt a sense of hope that had been absent for years. "Good morning," she said softly as she joined them, carrying a small basket of eggs. "The chickens are being productive today." The rancher nodded. "Excellent. That will help with meals for the week." He glanced at her, noticing how the light caught her face, revealing the quiet strength that had become so essential to their household. "You've done well here," he said. "The ranch, it feels different because of you. Better." Her lips curved into a small smile. "I didn't know if I could manage," she admitted, "but I wanted to. For him and for us." She touched her son's shoulder gently, and he smiled back at her, sensing the unspoken bond forming among them. The day was spent with routine and learning. The boy helped herd cattle into the pens, now moving with confidence and skill. The rancher guided him patiently, teaching him more than just physical work. He taught him responsibility, courage, and patience. "Every action has a consequence," the rancher reminded him as he helped a calf back into the pen. "Pay attention, think ahead, and act with care. That is how you grow strong, not just with muscles, but with your mind and heart." The boy listened intently, eager to please and to learn.
His small hands worked skillfully, guided by instruction and the natural curiosity that had grown under the rancher's quiet mentorship.
He laughed when he succeeded, and when he faltered, the rancher reassured him with calm guidance rather than scolding. Each success and mistake became a lesson, and each lesson brought them closer together. Meanwhile, the widow continued her work with the land. She had expanded the small garden she had begun planting months earlier, now cultivating vegetables, herbs, and flowers. She had built a connection with the earth, learning from the rancher but also trusting her instincts, and the land responded. The cabin felt warmer, more welcoming, a reflection of her growing sense of purpose and belonging. She took pride not only in the work itself but in the quiet joy of seeing her son thrive and the rancher slowly open his heart to the possibility of family. As afternoon approached, the rancher took a moment to observe them both. He realized how far they had come. The boy was no longer timid or uncertain. He ran across the fields with confidence, rode Dusty with skill, and spoke with clarity and courage. The widow had transformed from a wary newcomer into a capable, resilient woman who contributed to every aspect of ranch life, and he, the solitary rancher, had learned the profound satisfaction of guiding, protecting, and caring for others. Evening arrived, and the three gathered on the porch of the cabin. The desert stretched wide before them, painted in shades of orange, purple, and gold. The boy leaned against the rancher, exhausted but happy, while the widow sat nearby, her hands folded in her lap. The wind whispered softly through the mesquite trees, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and earth. "You know," the rancher began, his voice quiet, "I didn't expect this life when I first came here. I thought I would be alone, managing my land and my cattle. But you two, you've changed everything. In a good way." The widow looked at him, eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "We didn't expect this either," she said softly. "But it feels right. Safe. Like maybe this is where we belong." The boy's eyes widened. "Does that mean we're really a family?" he asked, voice full of hope. The rancher smiled, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder. "Yes," he said simply. "We're a family, not because of what's happened before, but because of what we choose to do now. We look after each other, care for each other, and stay together. That is what makes a family." The boy's face lit up, and he hugged the rancher tightly. The widow's hand rested lightly on his shoulder, and together they watched the sun sink behind the hills, a quiet sense of peace settling over them. In the days that followed, life continued with a comforting rhythm. The boy became more skilled at every aspect of ranch work, learning not only about animals and land, but also about trust, respect, and responsibility. The widow took on more leadership in the home, balancing chores, garden work, and teaching her son lessons about kindness, courage, and resilience. The rancher guided them both, offering wisdom and protection, slowly letting his heart open fully to the possibility of love and family. Word of their unity and success spread to nearby townsfolk. Some were curious, some skeptical, but gradually, respect replaced doubt. People began to see the widow as capable and honorable, the boy as bright and hard-working, and the rancher as fair and strong. Acceptance was slow, but it came, and it allowed them to breathe a little easier, knowing that their family could exist openly without constant scrutiny. One quiet afternoon, the trio sat together under the shade of the largest mesquite tree on the ranch. The boy played with a small wooden toy he had carved. The widow tended to her garden, and the rancher observed both with a soft smile. He realized how far they had all come, from strangers brought together by circumstance, to a family forged through trust, care, and shared hardship. The boy had a father who guided him, protected him, and nurtured him. The widow had a partner who respected her, valued her, and supported her. And he had something he never thought possible: a family, a home, and a purpose beyond himself. As the day faded into night, the rancher reflected on the journey they had taken, the dangers of the desert, the hardships of ranch life, the challenges of trust and fear. All had been part of the path that led them here. And now, in the quiet glow of the evening, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life had tested them, but it had also given them something precious: a chance to belong, to care, and to grow together. The boy eventually fell asleep in his small bed, dreaming of cattle, riding, and adventures on the wide open land. The widow sat nearby, brushing her hair back and watching over him, her heart full of hope and relief. The rancher stepped outside, standing under the starry sky, taking a moment to appreciate the peace and warmth that now filled the ranch. The land, once a place of solitude, had become a home, a place of safety, love, and possibility. In that stillness, the rancher understood that family was not defined solely by blood or history. It was built through shared experiences, trust, care, and commitment. It was nurtured by patience, courage, and love. And as the wind whispered softly through the desert, he realized that the bond they had formed was stronger than any obstacle, deeper than any fear, and enduring in a way that could withstand time and hardship. Life on the ranch continued, not without work or challenge, but with a sense of joy and unity that had been absent before. The boy thrived under the guidance of his new father, learning skills, values, and lessons that would serve him for a lifetime. The widow grew confident, independent, and hopeful, her love for the rancher and her son deepening each day. And the rancher, once a solitary man, embraced the fullness of family life, discovering a happiness he had never known. As the sun rose on another day, casting golden light across the hills and fields, the three of them stood together on the porch, looking over their land. The boy's laughter carried in the wind. The widow's gentle smile warmed the heart, and the rancher's steady presence provided safety and guidance. Together they faced the future with courage and hope, knowing that whatever came their way, they would face it as a family, strong, united, and full of love. In the heart of the desert, on a ranch that had once known only solitude, a new story had begun. A story of trust, resilience, and the quiet power of human connection. And in that story, the virgin rancher, the Apache widow, and her son found not only safety and home, but the profound truth that family is not just given, it is built, nurtured, and cherished every day.